The salvage depot smelled of rust and old metal. Rows of crates stretched into the dark, each one filled with junk pulled from worlds that no longer had names. Workers from a dozen species moved through the aisles, scanning items, tossing the worthless ones aside, and arguing over prices in clicking, growling tongues. In the coldest corner of the depot, far from the heat lamps and the busy traders, sat a single egg. It was large, taller than a man's knee, and its shell was the color of dying coals. Thin cracks ran across its surface like old scars. Dust had settled over it for weeks. No one touched it. No one wanted it. The egg was the last dragon egg in the galaxy. Every species knew the stories. Dragons had once ruled a burning world, creatures of fire and fury that no army could tame. When their planet died, so did they, all but this one forgotten egg. The traders called it cursed. They said the creature inside, if it ever hatched, would bring only ruin. So the egg sat in the cold, waiting for the day someone would finally throw it into the recycler. Daniel worked the night shift at the depot. He was a human, quiet and lean, with tired eyes and rough hands. He had come to the station years ago, after losing everything that had ever mattered to him. He did not talk much. He did his job, scanned the crates, and went home to an empty room. The other workers barely noticed he was there. That night, while sorting a fresh load of scrap, Daniel walked past the cold corner. He almost missed the egg in the shadows, but something made him stop. He turned and looked at it, really looked, the way a person looks at something that reminds them of themselves. It was alone, forgotten, pushed to the farthest, darkest spot where no one would have to see it. Daniel set down his scanner and stepped closer. He brushed the dust off the shell with his palm. Beneath the grime, the egg had a faint warmth, just barely there, like the last breath of a fire about to go out. "What are you?" he said softly. "You don't want to know," said a voice behind him. Daniel turned. A tall alien stood there, one of the depot supervisors, with gray scaled skin and 4 narrow eyes. The creature's name was Orin, and he had worked the salvage routes for longer than Daniel had been alive. "That's the dragon egg," Orin said. "Last one in the whole galaxy, and good riddance to the rest." Daniel looked back at the egg. "Why is it just sitting here?" "Because no one is foolish enough to take it." Orin's 4 eyes narrowed. "Dragons are death, human. Their world burned because of them. Whole fleets were lost trying to control them. We don't tame dragons, we bury them." He waved a clawed hand. "That thing is scheduled for the recycler at the end of the week. Best place for it." Daniel said nothing for a moment. He thought about the recycler, about how the egg would be crushed and melted and turned into scrap like everything else. He thought about how the whole galaxy had decided this one small thing was worthless before it ever had the chance to live. "How much to take it?" Daniel asked. Orin let out a sharp, hissing laugh. "Take it, you want it." "How much?" The alien stared at him like he had lost his mind. The other workers nearby had stopped to listen now. A few of them chuckled. Word spread fast in a place like this, and the idea of a lonely human wanting the cursed egg was the funniest thing they had heard in weeks. "It's just disposal scrap," Orin said at last, shaking his head. "Pay the disposal fee and it's yours, but mark my words, human. You take that thing home and you take its curse with it. Whatever happens after is on you." Daniel reached into his worn jacket and pulled out his credit chip. He pressed it to the depot scanner. A small fee, the cost of a meal, blinked across the screen and vanished. The egg was his. The workers laughed harder now. One of them, a thick-armed creature with too many teeth, called out across the aisle. "The human bought the curse. Hope you like ash soft skin." Daniel ignored them. He always did. He wrapped his arms around the egg and lifted it. It was heavier than he expected, and the warmth of it pressed against his chest, faint but real. As he carried it toward the exit, the other species parted around him, some grinning, some shaking their heads, all of them certain he had made a terrible mistake. Orin watched him go. For a moment, something close to pity crossed the old alien's scaled face. "You humans," he muttered, "always picking up broken things." Daniel stepped out of the depot and into the cold corridor of the station. The egg pressed against him, warm and silent. He did not know why he had done it. He could not explain the pull he had felt, standing in that dark corner. Maybe it was the dust. Maybe it was the way the egg had been shoved aside and left to die. Or maybe it was because Daniel knew exactly what that felt like. He held the egg a little tighter and started the long walk home, past the staring eyes, past the laughter that followed him down the hall. Whatever was inside that shell, cursed or not, dangerous or not, it would not spend its last days alone in the cold. Not while he was around. The egg gave a single, soft pulse of heat against his chest, as if something deep inside had heard him. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel did not feel quite so alone. Daniel's home was a single small room near the lower decks of the station, the kind of place given to workers who had no one and nothing. There was a narrow bed, a battered table, a cooking unit that only half worked, and one small window that looked out at the endless black of space. It was not much, but it was warm and it was his. He set the dragon egg down in the middle of the floor and stood back to look at it. In the soft light of his room, the shell looked even more worn than it had in the depot. The cracks worried him. He wondered if the creature inside had already died long ago, if he had brought home nothing more than a shell. But there was that warmth. He had felt it. So Daniel decided to act as if there was still life inside and to give it the best chance he could. He gathered every blanket he owned and built a soft nest around the egg. He pulled the heating unit close and set it to a gentle, steady glow. Then he sat down beside it on the floor, tired from his shift, and simply watched. "I don't know much about dragons," he said quietly. "I don't think anyone really does. They just told me you were trouble, but I figured everybody deserves a warm place to sleep, even trouble." The egg did nothing. Of course it did nothing. Daniel almost felt foolish for talking, but the room was so quiet and it had been so long since he had spoken to anyone who would not laugh at him that he kept going anyway. He talked about his shift, about the rust and the noise of the depot. He talked until his eyes grew heavy, and then he fell asleep right there on the floor beside the egg. In the days that followed, Daniel built a routine. He worked his shifts, endured the jokes from the other workers, and hurried home to check on the egg. He read every old salvage record he could find about dragons, though most of them were filled with fear and warnings and very little fact. The records said dragons were drawn to warmth and to sound, especially to a steady, caring voice. So Daniel gave it both. His neighbors noticed. The station walls were thin, and word of the foolish human and his cursed egg had spread far. One evening, as Daniel carried home a fresh bundle of heat packs, two of his neighbors stopped him in the hall. They were tall, slender beings with long necks and skin like polished stone, members of a proud species that valued order above all else. "You are the one keeping the dragon thing," one of them said. It was not a question. "I am," Daniel said. "It is reckless," the alien said, its voice cold. "You humans are always like this. You take in broken, dangerous things and you call it kindness. That egg will bring ruin to this whole deck. When it hatches, it will burn us all." "If it hatches," Daniel said, "and if it does, I'll take care of it. It won't hurt anyone." The two aliens looked at each other and made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You cannot promise that. No one controls a dragon. Your kind never learns." They turned and walked away, shaking their long heads. Daniel went inside and shut the door. He looked at the egg in its nest of blankets. For 5 days now it had not moved. No glow, no warmth beyond the heating unit, nothing. The doubt crept back into his chest. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe there was nothing here but an old dead shell and the laughter of an entire station. That night Daniel sat beside the egg as he always did. He was bone-tired and quiet, and he did not feel much like talking. But the silence felt too heavy, so he reached out and rested his rough hand against the warm shell. I lost my family a long time ago, he said softly. He had never told anyone this, not in all his years on the station. There was an accident, a ship. I was the only one who made it. After that, everyone just sort of moved past me like I was already gone too. He swallowed. I know what it feels like to be the thing nobody wants, so I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I'm staying right here. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then beneath his palm, the egg grew warm. Not the faint warmth of before, but a real living heat that spread through the shell and into his hand. A soft glow began to pulse deep inside, slow at first, like a heartbeat waking up. The cracks on the surface filled with light, glowing the deep orange of a fire catching hold. Daniel's breath caught. He did not move his hand. He was afraid that if he did, the glow would stop, that he would wake from some foolish dream. "You're alive," he whispered. "You're really in there." The egg pulsed brighter as if in answer. The glow rose and fell in time with his words, brightening when he spoke and dimming when he went quiet. It was listening. It had heard him, every night, all of it. The warmth and the voice had reached something inside that shell, something that had been waiting in the cold and the dark just like him, for someone to care whether it lived or died. Daniel laughed, a quiet, broken sound he barely recognized as his own. His eyes stung. He had not felt this in years, this small, fierce spark of hope. "Okay," he said, smiling at the glowing egg. "Okay, we're going to be just fine, you and me." The egg glowed warm against his hand all through the night, and for the first time in a very long time, Daniel was not talking to an empty room. It happened on a quiet morning in the gray hour before Daniel's shift. He was half asleep on the floor beside the nest when a sharp sound woke him, a crack, loud and clean, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. He sat up fast. The egg was shaking. The glow inside had grown so bright that it lit the whole room in shades of warm orange. As Daniel watched, a piece of the shell broke away and fell into the blankets. Then another. A small claw, no bigger than his thumb, poked through the opening. "It's happening," Daniel breathed. "Come on, you can do it." The shell split wide and the creature inside tumbled out into the soft blankets. It was small, far smaller than the legends had promised, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were a deep, glowing red, like coals fresh from a fire. Tiny wings, still wet and folded, clung to its sides. Two large eyes blinked open, golden and bright, and they found Daniel at once. The hatchling stared at him. Daniel stared back, hardly breathing. According to every record he had read, dragons were violent from the moment they were born. They were supposed to lash out, to burn, to fear and attack anything near them. This one did none of that. It looked at Daniel with its golden eyes, let out a small, questioning chirp, and then crawled across the blankets straight toward him. It pressed its warm little body against his chest and went still, listening, Daniel realized, to the steady beat of his heart. The same heartbeat it had heard from inside the shell every night. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice thick. He cupped his hands around the tiny creature. "Hey, there you are." The hatchling chirped again and nuzzled deeper into his jacket. News of the hatching tore through the station faster than any fire. By the time Daniel returned home from his shift that day, a small crowd had gathered outside his door. Word had spread that the cursed egg had finally opened, and a dozen curious aliens had come to see the monster for themselves. Many of them carried weapons. They expected to find a beast tearing the room apart. They expected screaming. They expected death. Instead, when Daniel opened the door, they saw the small red dragon perched on his shoulder, calmly chewing on a strip of dried meat he had brought it. The hatchling looked at the crowd, tilted its head, and gave a small, friendly chirp. The aliens fell silent. They had never seen anything like it. A dragon, the most feared creature in galactic history, sitting peacefully on a human's shoulder like a pet bird. Orin, the old depot supervisor, pushed his way to the front. His 4 eyes went wide as he took in the sight. "Impossible," he said. "That thing should be feral. It should be trying to kill you." "He's not feral," Daniel said. "He's just a baby." To prove it, One of the braver aliens, a heavy-set creature with thick orange hide, stepped forward and held out a piece of food. The hatchling sniffed at it, then turned away and refused it, pressing back against Daniel's neck. It would only take food from his hand. It had imprinted on him completely, on the voice and the warmth and the heartbeat that had kept it alive through the long, cold weeks in the dark. "It only trusts the human," someone whispered in the crowd. "It chose him," said another. The aliens did not know what to make of it. Their whole understanding of dragons had been built on fear, on old stories of fire and war. But here was the last dragon in the galaxy, and instead of a weapon, it had become a small, trusting creature that loved one lonely man. The crowd slowly lowered their weapons. Some of them simply stared. A few backed away, unsettled by a thing that did not fit anything they believed. That evening, after the crowd had gone, Daniel sat on the floor with the hatchling curled in his lap. It had eaten its fill and now dozed against him, its scales warm, a soft rumble coming from its chest with every breath. He stroked the smooth scales along its back, marveling at how something so feared could be so gentle. "They all thought you'd be a monster," he said quietly. "They were so sure, but you just wanted someone to hold you, didn't you? That's all it ever was." The hatchling opened one golden eye, looked up at him, and let out a contented little sound before drifting back to sleep. Daniel smiled. He thought about names. The creature deserved a name, something simple and good. He looked out the small window at the stars beyond, the open black where this little one's kind had once flown free before the galaxy decided they were better off dead. "Sky," he said, "I'll call you Sky, because that's where you belong, up there, free, not stuck in some cold corner waiting to be thrown away." The newly named Sky stirred at the sound of his voice and pressed closer, as if the name fit just right. For the first time, Daniel's small room did not feel empty or sad. It felt like a home, a real one, with someone in it who needed him and trusted him completely. The other species could laugh and whisper all they liked. They could call the dragon cursed and call Daniel a fool. None of it mattered now. He had a family again, small and strange and covered in red scales, but a family all the same. Outside in the corridors, the whispers were already changing. The story was no longer about a foolish human and a cursed egg. It was becoming something else, something the station had never seen before, a tale of a dragon that had chosen kindness, and a man who had been the only one to offer it. 3 weeks passed and Sky grew fast. The little dragon was now the size of a large dog, his red scales darker and harder, his wings strong enough to carry him in short, clumsy hops across Daniel's room. He followed Daniel everywhere, perched on his shoulder during shifts, slept curled at his feet at night, and chirped with delight whenever Daniel came home. The workers at the depot had stopped laughing. Many of them had grown fond of the strange pair, leaving scraps of food for Sky and watching in quiet wonder as he played. But not everyone was charmed. Some watched with very different eyes. The trouble came in the form of a delegation. They arrived on the station without warning, members of a wealthy and powerful trade clan known across the sector for buying, selling, and owning anything of value. Their leader was a tall, broad creature named Vorn, draped in dark armor plating that marked his rank. He had heard the stories. He had come for the dragon. Vorn found Daniel in the depot at the end of his shift. 2 armed guards flanked him, and behind them stood a station official, looking nervous and small. "Human," Vorn said, his voice deep and flat. "You are in possession of a dragon, the last one in the known galaxy. Do you understand what that means?" Daniel set down his scanner. Sky, on his shoulder, went still and watched the strangers with wary golden eyes. "It means I have a friend," Daniel said. Vorn made a low, rumbling sound that was not a laugh. "It means you are holding the most valuable weapon in existence. Dragons are creatures of war. With proper training and control, that beast could be worth more than this entire station. It is wasted on you." He held out a heavy clawed hand. "My clan is prepared to take it off your hands. Generously. You will never have to work again. He's not for sale, Daniel said. The nervous official cleared his throat. Daniel, please. The clan has legal standing. Dragons are classified as dangerous war assets under sector law. They are arguing the creature cannot be left in the hands of a single civilian. There may be pressure to comply. Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached up and gently stroked Sky's back. The dragon leaned into his touch, but his eyes never left Vorn. Let me make sure I understand, Daniel said slowly. The whole galaxy threw this egg away, called it cursed, left it to be crushed in a recycler. Nobody wanted it. Nobody cared if it lived or died. But now that he's alive and gentle and worth something, suddenly everybody wants a piece of him. Sentiment is meaningless, Vorn said. The creature is an asset. It should be in the hands of those who can use it. Use it, Daniel repeated. He let out a quiet, bitter breath. That's the difference between you and me. You see a weapon. I see somebody who needed help. Vorn stepped closer, towering over the human. The guards shifted, hands moving toward their weapons. Sky let out a low warning sound deep in his chest, and a thin wisp of smoke curled from his nostrils. You are a single, soft creature, Vorn said. You have no clan, no fleet, no power. You cannot stand against us. Hand over the dragon and you walk away rich. Refuse and we take it anyway. The only choice you have is how much pain comes with it. The depot had gone silent. The other workers had stopped to watch, the old supervisor Orin among them, his 4 eyes wide. They all knew what Vorn was. They knew his clan crushed anyone who stood in their way. They expected the human to fold. He was one man against a power that owned half the sector. Any sane creature would give in. Daniel did not fold. He stepped forward, small and unarmed, and looked up into Vorn's armored face without flinching. You're not taking him, he said. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake. I don't care what your law says. I don't care how rich your clan is. When I found him, he was alone and dying in a cold corner, and not one of you lifted a finger. I did. He's mine now, and I'm his, and that's not something you can buy or steal. Vorn stared at him, genuinely puzzled. To his kind, this made no sense. No wealth, no power, no advantage in it at all, only risk and ruin. Why? The alien demanded. Why would you throw away your life for a beast? What does it gain you? Daniel reached up and rested his hand on Sky's warm head. The dragon pressed against him, loyal and unafraid. Because I know what it's like to be left behind, Daniel said. I know what it's like when everyone decides you don't matter, when they move on and leave you in the cold. I spent years feeling like that, and I swore that if I ever found something else that felt the same way, I would never do to it what was done to me. He looked Vorn dead in the eyes. So no, you can't have him, not while I'm breathing. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The workers held their breath. Vorn's guards waited for the order. The official looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Then Vorn straightened and a cold smile spread across his hard face. Brave words from a small creature, he said. But bravery is not strength. We will give you one night to come to your senses. Tomorrow we take the dragon, with your blessing or without it. He turned and swept out of the depot, his guards closed behind. The official scurried after them, throwing Daniel an apologetic, helpless glance. Daniel stood very still, his heart pounding. Sky nuzzled against his cheek, sensing his fear, trying to comfort him. It's okay, Daniel murmured, though it was not. I won't let them take you, I promise. He had no fleet, no clan, no power, only a promise and a small dragon who trusted him with everything. Tomorrow, that would have to be enough. They did not wait until morning. Daniel woke to the hiss of his door being forced open. It was the dead middle of the night cycle, the station dim and quiet. He sat up just in time to see dark shapes pushing into his small room. Vorn's guards, 4 of them, armored and armed, with Vorn himself stepping through the broken doorway behind them. Liars, Daniel spat, scrambling to his feet and putting himself between the intruders and Sky. You said morning. I said we would take the dragon, Vorn replied calmly. I never said we would play fair. Step aside, human. There is no need for you to be harmed. Sky was awake now, crouched low behind Daniel, his golden eyes glowing in the dark. A deep, rumbling growl rolled out of the young dragon's chest. Smoke poured from his nostrils, thicker than before. Take him, Vorn ordered. The guards moved fast. One of them shoved Daniel aside, hard, sending him crashing into the wall. Pain shot through his shoulder. Another guard lunged for Sky with a glowing capture net, the kind used to trap dangerous animals. The dragon shrieked and tried to back away, but the room was small and there was nowhere to run. Sky, Daniel shouted, pushing himself up. Leave him alone. A guard kicked him back down. And that was when something changed. Sky saw Daniel fall. He saw the rough hands and the weapons and the man who had saved him bleeding on the floor. And something deep inside the last dragon, something ancient that had slept in his blood since before the egg was ever found, woke up all at once. The growl became a roar. It was far too loud and too deep to come from a creature his size, a sound that shook the walls and rattled the metal floor. Sky's red scales began to glow, brighter and brighter, until they shone like molten iron. Heat poured off him in waves, filling the small room, and the guards stumbled back, shielding their faces. The dragon's scales hardened, shifting and locking together like living armor. His small wings snapped open wide. He was not a frightened hatchling anymore. He was what his kind had always been before the galaxy decided to fear them, a creature of fire and fierce, blazing loyalty. Sky threw himself between Daniel and the guards. The capture net came down, but it struck the dragon's glowing armored scales and simply melted away, dripping to the floor in useless drops of molten cord. The lead guard swung a weapon, and Sky met it with a blast of searing heat that drove the alien stumbling back into his companions. The dragon did not breathe fire wildly, did not burn the room or harm Daniel. Every bit of his fury was aimed with perfect, protective focus at the ones who had hurt the human he loved. The guards panicked. They had come to capture a valuable animal. Instead, they faced an awakened dragon radiating heat that warped the very air, standing guard over a fallen man with eyes like burning gold. "Pull back," one of them cried. "Pull back." Vorn stood frozen in the doorway, his cold confidence cracking for the first time. He had seen old recordings of dragons in battle. He had thought them just stories, exaggerations of the past. But here it was, real and blazing in front of him, and it was protecting a human. By now the noise had drawn a crowd. Workers and residents from across the deck pressed into the corridor, drawn by the roar and the orange glow spilling from Daniel's doorway. Orin was among them, and the heavy-set orange-hided alien, and the proud stone-skinned neighbors who had once mocked Daniel in the hall. They all stared in stunned silence at the sight before them. A man, bruised and bleeding, slowly climbing to his feet, and a dragon, glowing like a small sun, wings spread wide, placing itself between that man and all the world's harm. Daniel reached out and laid a shaking hand on Sky's blazing scales. They should have burned him. They did not. Beneath all that heat and fury, the dragon knew exactly whose touch this was, and the scales beneath Daniel's palm cooled at once, gentle as ever. "Easy," Daniel said softly. "Easy, Sky, I'm okay. You did good, I'm okay." The dragon's roar faded into a low rumble. The blazing glow dimmed, the killing heat drew back, but Sky did not lower his wings. He kept himself between Daniel and Vorn, golden eyes fixed on the clan leader, a clear and silent promise in them. "You will not touch him." Vorn looked at the crowd. He looked at the melted net on the floor, at his shaken guards, at the small human standing tall beside an impossible, blazing creature that had chosen him over all the galaxy. The clan leader was a creature of cold calculation, and the calculation had changed. There was no profit here. There was only a power he did not understand and could not control, bound by loyalty to a man he could not buy. "This is not over," Vorn said, but his voice had lost its certainty. He took a step back toward the door. "Yes," Daniel said quietly, "it is." The crowd in the corridor parted as Vorn and his guards retreated, their heads low, their grand confidence burned away. They had come to take the last dragon by force. They left with nothing but the memory of its fire and the sight of a lonely human who had refused, against all reason, to give up the one thing he loved. When they were gone, Sky finally folded his wings. The glow faded from his scales until he was just a young dragon again, tired and trembling. He turned and pressed his head against Daniel's chest, and the man wrapped his arms around the creature and held on tight. "You saved me," Daniel whispered. "You crazy, wonderful thing, you saved me." Around them, the watching crowd did not laugh, not this time. They simply stared, and in their eyes was something brand new, not fear, not greed. Wonder. Word of that night spread across the station, and then far beyond it. Traders carried the story to other ports. Pilots passed it along their routes. Within a month, the tale of the human and the last dragon had reached worlds Daniel had never heard of, and everywhere it went, it made people stop and think. A council was called. The sector authorities, the same ones who had once classified dragons as war assets to be controlled or destroyed, summoned their best minds to study what had happened. Biologists, historians, and old keepers of dragon records gathered to ask a question that none of them had ever truly asked before. What if they had been wrong about dragons all along? For generations, every species had agreed on the same hard truth. Dragons were monsters. Their world had burned because of their fury. Fleets had been lost trying to tame them. The records were full of fire and death, and so the galaxy had learned to fear them, and at last to be glad they were gone. But now there was Sky, a dragon who had hatched gentle, who had grown loyal, who had used his terrible power only to shield a wounded friend. He did not match the legends at all, and so the council went back and read the old records again, more carefully this time, and they found something they had missed. In every story of dragons turning violent, of dragons burning ships and worlds, there was a detail buried in the fear. The dragons had always been taken by force, captured, caged, treated as weapons and beasts from the moment they were found. They had been bound in chains and shocked into obedience and made to fight in wars they never chose. No one had ever simply cared for one. No one had ever offered a dragon warmth, or a voice, or a gentle hand. No one had ever loved one. Until a lonely human took the last egg home. The truth settled over the council like a cold wind. Dragons were never cursed. They were never born monsters. They had become furious because the galaxy had only ever given them cruelty, and cruelty was all they had learned to answer with. Every other species had looked at a dragon and seen a weapon to use or a danger to destroy. It had taken a human, a creature small and weak and full of strange, stubborn compassion, to look at a dragon and simply see something that needed help. Daniel was asked to speak before the council. He stood in a great hall full of beings far older and wiser and more powerful than him, with Sky resting calmly at his side. He was not a clever speaker. He did not know grand words, so he just told them the truth. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I found him alone in the cold and I gave him a warm place to sleep. I talked to him so he wouldn't be lonely. I fed him and I stayed with him and I didn't give up on him." He rested his hand on Sky's head and the dragon leaned into him. "That's it. That's the whole secret you've all been trying to figure out. You wanted to know why he's gentle when the others were fierce. It's because somebody finally was gentle with him first." The hall was silent. Then slowly, the beings of a dozen worlds began to understand. They had spent generations afraid of a mirror. The dragons had only ever reflected back what was shown to them. In the months that followed, everything changed. The trade clans were forbidden from ever claiming a dragon as property again. Sky was declared not an asset but a person, the first of his kind to be recognized that way. And quietly, in research stations far from the busy lanes, scientists revealed something they had kept hidden out of fear. A handful of other dragon eggs had been found over the years, locked away in cold vaults, deemed too dangerous to hatch. Now, for the first time, they would be given a chance. Not to be tamed or used, but to be cared for, the way Daniel had cared for Sky. The galaxy had decided, at last, to try kindness. Sky grew into a magnificent creature, his wingspan wide enough to fill a docking bay, his scales the deep, warm red of a sunset. He could have ruled worlds with the power in him. Instead, he chose to stay at Daniel's side, the two of them flying salvage routes together, helping bring lost and broken things back to where they belonged. It seemed fitting. They both knew, better than anyone, the worth of a thing that others had thrown away. The old depot supervisor, Orin, never forgot it. Years later, when young workers asked him about the famous dragon and his human, he would tell them the same thing every time. Every species in this galaxy walked past that egg, he would say, shaking his old scaled head. We were smarter, stronger, richer, prouder, and not one of us stopped. It took a human, a grieving, lonely human with nothing to his name. He looked at the thing nobody wanted, and he took it home, and he loved it. That's the whole story. That's what your kind always seem to forget. Sometimes the strongest thing in the galaxy isn't a fleet or a fortune. It's somebody willing to care. Daniel never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a man who had been alone, who had found someone else who was alone, and who had decided they did not have to be alone anymore. On quiet evenings, he and Sky would sit by a wide window and watch the stars, the open black where dragons were meant to fly. Daniel would rest his hand on the warm scales, and Sky would rumble softly, content. No one had wanted the last dragon egg. The whole galaxy had turned away from it. Until a lonely human took it home. And in doing so, he did not just save one dragon, he saved them all.